the sensor array on the edge of Vorathi space, had never screamed before. It hummed. It pinged. It blinked soft amber when a comet drifted too close to the border line. But it had never, in 300 years of operation, produced the sound it made at 3:12 station time on the fourth cycle of the harvest month. A scream. A long, flat, continuous scream that woke every technician in the monitoring station from their sleep bunks and sent them stumbling into the control room in various states of undress, staring at a display board that had gone completely red. Station Commander Vethra pressed his secondary hands against his temples and stared at the screen. "Run the diagnostic," he said. Junior Technician Paul ran it. "Clean," Paul said. His voice was very small. "Run it again." "Commander." "Run it again, Paul." Paul ran it again. The board stayed red. Every border sensor from marker point 7 to marker point 19 was screaming at the same pitch, the same frequency, the same relentless, unbroken tone. That was a stretch of border nearly 40,000 kilometers wide. Something had crossed it, something large. Vethra looked at the tracking data. The object was not on any registry, not the Imperial Registry, which contained every known vessel operating within 100 light-years of Vorathi space, not the Neutral Registry, which tracked merchant ships and independent scouts, not the Threat Registry, which cataloged the known warships of every species the Empire had ever gone to war with. Not anywhere. The object existed in no database that the monitoring station could access. It was also moving at a speed that made Vethra's secondary stomach clench. "Get me a visual," he said. "Sensors aren't resolving a clean image at this range," said Technician Mar, who had arrived last and still had her uniform sealed wrong. "The object is producing interference, heavy interference. Our long-range cameras are getting—" She stopped. "Getting what, Mar?" "Noise," she said. "Just noise, like it's eating the signal." Vethra stood very still. Ships did not eat sensor signals. Ships reflected them. Ships absorbed some of the energy and bounced the rest back, and from that bounce you learned what you needed to know. Hull composition, drive signature, mass heat bloom. Every ship in the known galaxy had a signature as readable as a name printed on a wall. This thing had no signature. It had a hole where a signature should be. "Distance to the nearest inhabited system?" Vethra asked. At current speed, Paul checked his screen. His hands were shaking slightly. 14 hours. "Current speed," Vethra repeated. "Not projected speed. Is it accelerating?" Silence. "Paul." "It accelerated twice since it crossed the border," Paul said. "Both times in short bursts. Then it went back to cruise. Commander, the burst speeds." He stopped again. "Say the number, Paul." Paul said the number. Vethra sat down. He did not mean to sit. His legs simply made the decision without consulting him. The burst speeds were not possible. They were not possible under any drive technology the Empire had catalogued. They were not possible under theoretical technologies the Empire's best physicists had sketched out on boards and argued about over long meals. The number Paul had read off the screen was a number that belonged in a fever dream, not a sensor report. "Send the emergency burst to Fleet Command," Vethra said. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. "Full data package, priority 1, and get me a line to the High Coordinator's office." "At this hour?" Mar asked. Vethra looked at her. She opened the line. The news moved faster than the ship did. That was saying something, given what the ship was doing to the speed charts. By the time the emergency burst from the border station hit Fleet Command on Vorathi Prime, 3 other monitoring posts along the same stretch of border had added their own data to the file. Each one had the same story, same red boards, same missing signature, same hole in the sensor return where a ship's identity should have been, same impossible numbers. Fleet Admiral Cosvaran was eating breakfast when his aide put the data tablet in front of him. He read the first 3 lines and put down his food. He read the rest of the report standing up, because sitting did not feel like an appropriate posture for what he was reading. Then he called the High Coordinator's office himself, without waiting for the monitoring stations to do it. High Coordinator Thessaly Orvin took the call in her private chambers. She was a tall Vorathi female with gray-silver scales along her neck and the steady eyes of someone who had been managing crises since before Cosvarin had graduated from the Fleet Academy. She listened to his summary without interrupting. She looked at the data he transmitted to her personal screen. She was quiet for a long moment. "One ship," she said. "One ship," Cosvarin confirmed. "Single object, but the energy readings suggest." "I can read the energy readings, Admiral." "Yes, Coordinator." "One ship," she said again, more quietly. "Producing this much interference, moving at these speeds, and we have no record of it anywhere." "Correct." "Could it be a new weapon, something one of the border states is testing?" Cosvarin had thought about that. He had spent the 20 minutes between receiving the report and calling her thinking about almost nothing else. "The border states don't have the physics for it," he said. "The Dreth Confederacy has been working on their drive technology for 60 years. They're nowhere near these numbers. The Sulari wouldn't risk a provocation right now given the trade negotiations. And the Keth," he paused. "The Keth don't build ships this large." "How large?" "We don't have a clean reading. The interference is significant, but based on the shadow it's throwing on our deep sensors," he checked the number again. "Large, very large." Thessaly Orvin set down her cup. "Scramble a response fleet. Standard intercept formation. I want them moving within the hour." "Already ordered. Admiral Drain is assembling Third Fleet at the Varoth staging point." "Good, and I want communication attempts. Every frequency we have. Standard hails, diplomatic channels, emergency broadcasts. If this thing has a crew, I want to know who they are." "We've been broadcasting since the border station made contact. No response." The High Coordinator looked at her screen again. At the red track of the unidentified object moving through Imperial space like it had not noticed the border was there, or like it simply did not care. "No response," she repeated. "None." She was quiet again. Cosvarin had known her for 20 years. He knew her silences. This one was not the silence of a person thinking calmly. This was the silence of a person looking at something that did not fit inside any of their categories and trying to build a new category fast enough to be useful. "Keep broadcasting," she said finally, "and wake the council, full session. I want everyone in the chamber within 2 hours." "Do you want me to notify the public information channels?" "No," she said very quickly. "Not yet. Not until we know what we're dealing with." She closed the channel. She sat alone in her chambers for a moment, looking at the blinking red dot on her screen. Moving through Imperial space at a speed her best ships could not match, eating sensor signals. Silent. She thought about the energy readings. She thought about the burst speed numbers. Then she thought about the 14 hours before it reached an inhabited system, and she made herself stop thinking and start moving. Third Fleet assembled faster than it had ever assembled in its history. Fleet Admiral Drain, a compact, sharp-eyed Vorathi male who had fought in 2 border conflicts and 1 full war, did not need to be told twice. He had read the data packet on his way to the command ship and had spent the transit time running numbers in his head that he did not like at all. By the time he boarded the Sovereign's Edge, the flagship of Third Fleet and the largest warship the Empire currently had in active service, he had already decided on his formation. 47 ships, a hammer in the center and a net on the flanks, enough firepower to turn a small moon into particulate matter, more than enough to stop anything that had ever entered Vorathi space before. He told himself that last part several times. The intercept course was clean. At the object's current heading, Third Fleet would meet it approximately 9 hours out from the nearest inhabited system, in the open space between the Varoth staging point and the Helen Drift. Empty space, good sensor range, room to maneuver. Good ground, if space could be called ground. Drain stood on the bridge of the Sovereign's Edge and watched his fleet finish forming up on the display. 47 ships, good ships. Crewed by people who knew their jobs. "Contact the flagship's communication array," he said. I want a live link to the border station data feed. Already connected, Admiral, said his communications officer, Ensign Seti. And the object's current position? Unchanged course, unchanged heading. It hasn't deviated a degree since it crossed the border. Drain nodded. That was a fact that sat in his chest in an uncomfortable way. It hadn't changed course. It knew Third Fleet was assembling. The fleet's drive signatures would have been readable on any half-decent sensor array, and it had not changed course, had not sped up, had not slowed down, had not responded to any of the hundreds of hail attempts being broadcast on every channel. It was simply continuing on its way. Like it was on a trip somewhere. Like it had a destination. Do we have any intelligence on the heading projection? Drain asked. If it maintains this course, where is it going? His navigation officer, a young female named Rath Sal, had already run it. If it doesn't change course, she said, it's heading for the Velhari cluster. Drain frowned. That's deep Imperial space. Yes, sir, 17 systems, some of the oldest Imperial colonies. Estimated transit at current cruise speed, she checked. 4 days after passing our intercept point. If it passed their intercept point. Which it would not. Drain looked at the display, at his 47 ships, at the blinking unknown contact on the far edge of the screen, moving calmly and steadily toward them. Open a fleet-wide channel, he said. Open, Admiral. He straightened. He thought about what to say. He had given pre-battle addresses before. He knew the shape of them. What he wanted to say and what was appropriate to say in a fleet address were different things, so he found the place where they overlapped. This is Admiral Drain, he said. You have all seen the data packet. We are going to intercept an unidentified object that has entered Imperial space without authorization and without responding to our communications. We do not know what it is. We do not know who built it. We do not know what it wants. He paused. What we know is that it is in our space, and we are the fleet that defends this space. Whatever this object is, it is going to meet us first. Conduct yourselves accordingly. Drain out. He closed the channel. Rath Sal and Seti and the other bridge crew looked at their screens. Nobody spoke. The unknown object kept moving. 9 hours. In the council chamber on Vorathi Prime, the senior members of the Imperial government were filing into their seats in the middle of the night, faces tight, uniforms hastily arranged, looking at each other for reassurance that none of them quite had to give. In the border monitoring station, Commander Vethra sat in his chair and watched the sensor feed and drank something hot that Paul had made for him and tried not to think too hard about what was on the other end of that signal. In the communication, broadcasts being sent out on every frequency, in every known language, in every format the Empire's translation banks could produce, the same message repeated over and over into the dark between the stars. Unidentified vessel, you have entered Imperial Vorathi space. Identify yourself immediately. State your origin. State your destination. State your intentions. Failure to comply will be considered an act of hostility. The message repeated. The message repeated. The message repeated. The ship kept moving. And somewhere in the dark, inside the hull of that ship, something was listening to all of it. Third Fleet saw it before the sensors made sense of it. That was the part Admiral Drain would think about later, lying awake in his bunk during the long hours when sleep refused to come. The moment the object appeared on the visual screens, not the data readouts, not the tracking displays, but the actual cameras pointed at actual space, and every officer on the bridge of the Sovereign's Edge went very quiet at the same time, without anyone saying a word. It was big. That was the first thing, just the size of it. The sensor interference had prevented clean mass readings, so the numbers had meant nothing concrete. Numbers were just numbers until you put a picture next to them. The ship was long, not wide. Long the way a thrown spear is long, built entirely in one direction, like whoever made it had decided that moving forward was the only thing that mattered and had built the entire vessel around that single purpose. Its hull was dark, Not the flat black of painted metal, but something deeper, something that seemed to pull light toward itself and keep it. The running lights, if it had any, were not visible. No exhaust bloom from the drives. No radiation signature from a reactor. Just a long dark shape moving through space like a splinter working its way through skin. Distance, Drain said. 40,000 kilometers and closing, said Rathsal. Her voice was perfectly controlled. Drain noted that and respected it. At current speed, it will reach our intercept line in approximately 19 minutes. Formation status. All 47 ships in position. Hammer formation holding. Flank nets are locked in. Drain nodded. The formation looked good on the display. His ships were spread across the object's projected path in a wall of firepower that should have been impossible to ignore. Anything coming toward that wall had two options: stop or turn. He watched the long dark shape continue forward, without any apparent acknowledgement that the wall existed. "Hail it again," he said. SETI opened the channel. For the 100th time, the communication logs had been counting. The Empire's message went out on every frequency. Identify yourself. State your origin. State your destination. State your intentions. The silence that came back was exactly the same as the 9 hours of silence that had come before it. Total. Complete. The kind of silence that stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like a statement. No response, SETI said. Nobody was surprised. Drain pressed his hands flat on the railing in front of him. He was not a man who needed to touch things to think, but right now it helped to feel something solid. 13 minutes, Rathsal said. He made his decision. All ships, he said into the fleet channel. We are going to hold formation and allow the object to approach to 10,000 kilometers. If it has not slowed or changed course by that point, I will attempt direct visual contact using emergency signal lights. If there is still no response, we will fire a warning spread single pass low yield across its bow. We are not trying to destroy it. We are trying to make it understand we are here. He paused. It is going to understand we are here. The fleet acknowledged. They waited. The long dark shape kept coming. 10,000 kilometers. Drain triggered the emergency signal lights himself. The Sovereign's edge strobed in the standard Imperial emergency pattern: 3 long, 3 short, 3 long, a pattern that every spacefaring species in the known galaxy had been taught to recognize as a request to hold position. The dark ship did not hold position. It did not accelerate. It did not turn. It maintained its speed with the indifference of a river maintaining its course around a rock. Warning spread, Drain said. Fire. 12 ships in the hammer formation released their bow cannons simultaneously. Low yield, a fraction of combat output, the kind of shot that would barely scratch a combat-rated hull. But in space, in the dark, 12 cannon blasts in a tight spread were impossible to miss. They lit up the black between the fleets like lightning, crossing the object's path close enough that any sensor array worth operating would have read the energy wash. The dark ship flew through the dissipating edge of the spread without slowing. Drain stared. It had flown through, not around, through the residual energy wash of 12 cannon blasts, and it had not even wobbled. There was no course correction, no evasion, just the same straight line, the same steady speed, like his warning shots were something that had happened to empty space rather than to it. Hull readings, he said. His science officer, Commander Haleth, checked his board. No impact readings, Haleth said. The blasts hit the energy field around the hull and he stopped. He looked at his board again. Admiral, the field absorbed the shots, all 12. The hull itself registered nothing. Nobody on the bridge spoke. 5,000 kilometers. Admiral, that was SETI, and his voice had shifted. Not unprofessional, but shifted. I'm picking up something on the communication array. It's not a response to our hails. It's a signal, different frequency. Origin point is the unknown vessel. Put it through. What came through the speakers was not language, not any language Drain knew. Which meant nothing. The Empire's translator banks held over 400 cataloged languages and 200 more in partial states of translation. But the translator banks were already running on the signal, and they were turning up nothing. Not a partial match. Not a structural similarity to anything on record. The signal had rhythm and pattern, which meant it was probably language, but it was language that had come from somewhere outside every catalog the Empire had ever built. "Can we translate it?" Drain said. "Not in real time," said the translation specialist, a quiet officer named Vane who rarely spoke during battle situations. "It would take," she shook her head, "months, maybe longer. The base structure is completely unlike anything in the bank." The signal continued for 11 seconds. Then it stopped. Then the dark ship did something. It slowed down. Not much, not a full stop, but it shed speed measurably, clearly on every sensor in the fleet, and for 1 second Drain thought his warning shots had finally worked, that the show of force had finally registered, that whatever was inside that hull had decided to acknowledge them. Then the dark ship turned on a lateral axis, smooth, fluid, like a fish changing direction in water, and pointed something at the Sovereign's edge. "Energy buildup," Haleth said. His voice was wrong. "On the forward section of the vessel. It's building very fast. Admiral, that is a weapon charging. That is definitely a weapon charging." Drain opened his mouth. The weapon did not fire. The energy built to a peak that made every sensor in the fleet spike into the red, and then it held there. Just held. Pointed directly at the Sovereign's edge like a finger held inches from someone's face. "Not firing. Pointing. It wants us to know it could," said Rathsal very quietly. She was right. Drain knew she was right before she finished the sentence. The weapon buildup was a message. It was not a warning shot. He had done warning shots. He knew what they looked like. This was a demonstration. A deliberate, controlled demonstration of capability pointed at his flagship, held at peak charge long enough for everyone to read the numbers, and then the energy dissipated. Slowly, deliberately, like a hand opened after being held in a fist. The dark ship returned to its original course. Same heading, Velhari cluster, same speed, like nothing had happened. Drain stood on his bridge and felt the silence of his crew pressing in from all sides. "Admiral," said he again, "Fleet Command is requesting a situation report." "Tell them," Drain stopped. He tried to figure out how to compress what had just happened into a report. The dark ship had ignored them, had flown through their warning shots without damage, had demonstrated a weapon powerful enough to spike every sensor in a 47-ship fleet, had then turned off the weapon and resumed course. "Tell them the object is continuing on its original heading," he said. "Tell them it has not responded to communication. Tell them our warning shots had no effect. And tell them," he took one breath, "tell them the object is armed in ways we cannot measure, and it showed us that on purpose." "Yes, sir." "And tell them I need orders, because I am not going to fire on that ship." Haleth looked up from his board. "Admiral." "What would be the point?" Drain said. He was not asking for opinions. He was stating the calculation out loud. "If our low-yield spread didn't scratch it, what does a full combat volley do? We find out. We find out what happens when we make something that powerful angry." He shook his head. "We don't have enough information. We don't engage without information." He watched the dark ship on his screen, moving away from his fleet now, having passed through their intercept line like they were smoke. "Keep formation and shadow it," he said. "Don't close, don't fire, just follow it. I want every sensor we have pointed at it every second." Third Fleet turned to follow the long dark shape deeper into Imperial space. In the council chamber on Vorathi Prime, the room that had been called into emergency session in the middle of the night had been meeting for 4 hours. The light through the high windows had changed from black to the deep gray blue of early morning, and nobody had gone home. High Coordinator Thessaly Orvan stood at the head of the long table and listened to Admiral Cosvarin relay Drain's report. She listened without moving. The senior council members around the table reacted in their own ways, some leaning forward, some pressing back in their chairs, one junior minister making a sound low in his throat that wasn't quite professional. When Cosvarin finished, she was quiet for a moment. "It showed him the weapon," she said. "Yes." "It didn't fire." "No." It showed him the weapon, she said again, differently this time, like she was testing the shape of the idea in her mouth. It demonstrated capability and then stood down, and then it continued on its way. That is the Admiral's assessment, yes. Council Member Orath, the oldest person in the room and the head of the Imperial Intelligence Division, leaned forward. He had white-silver scales and eyes that had been in difficult rooms longer than most people had been alive. That is a communication, he said. Whatever else it is, that is a communication. It is not attacking, but it is also not submitting. It is saying, I see you. I know what you are. I am not stopping. That is one interpretation, said Council Member Drea from the Military Affairs seat. She was young for her position and had been trying all morning to make her voice carry the weight of certainty. Another interpretation is that it fired a test shot to measure our whole response, and we're calling it a demonstration to make ourselves feel better. If it was a test shot, Orath said, without looking at her, it did not need to hold the charge for 6 seconds after peak buildup. That was not a test. That was a statement. The room was quiet. The question, Thessaly Orvan said, is what to do with a statement we cannot answer. We cannot translate the signal it sent. We cannot match its speed. We cannot damage its hull. She looked around the table. What options do we have that don't involve doing something that makes it decide to stop being patient? Nobody had a fast answer for that. We need more ships, Drea said finally. Enough that even if our weapons aren't individually effective. Numbers won't cover this gap, Cosvarin said flatly. You read the energy figures from that weapon charge. You run the math. Drea ran the math. She stopped talking about numbers. What about a civilian evacuation? Asked Council Member Teth, who handled population affairs. The Velhari cluster, if that's genuinely its destination. Evacuating 17 systems takes months, said Thessaly Orvan. We have days. She looked at the tracker on the wall screen, the blinking dot, moving steadily, followed now by Third Fleet's 47 ships that had accomplished nothing. And we don't know it's the destination. We don't know anything. The room felt the weight of that last sentence. She straightened. There was a thing leaders did in impossible rooms, a particular way of standing that said we are moving forward even when the path was not visible. She had done it before. I want every translation team in the Empire working on that signal, she said. I want our best physicists reviewing the sensor data from Third Fleet, every reading, every anomaly. I want intelligence running every hypothesis, no matter how strange. And I want a communications specialist standing by on Third Fleet's flagship 24 hours a day. She paused. It spoke once. It may speak again. When it does, I want someone ready to listen. And if it doesn't, Orath asked. Thessaly Orvan looked at the blinking dot on the screen. Then we find another way to ask, she said. Outside the council chamber, Vorathi Prime was waking up to a normal morning. Ships moved in the orbital lanes. Markets opened. Children went to school. The news channels had not yet reported anything unusual. The High Coordinator's information blackout was holding, for now. On the edge of Empire space, 39 hours from the heart of the Velhari cluster, the long dark ship continued on its way. Patient, silent, unhurried, like something that had been moving for a very long time and had simply decided that today it was going to move through here. The information blackout lasted exactly 22 hours. It broke the way these things always broke, not through an official announcement, not through a careful and managed release of information, but through a junior communications technician on a border monitoring station who told his brother, who told 4 people, who told 12 people. And by the time Thessaly Orvan's information office realized the story was loose, it had already reached 3 major news distribution networks and was sitting at the top of every public feed on Vorathi Prime with a headline that said, Unknown ship in Imperial space, fleet response fails. The headline was not entirely accurate. It was accurate enough. Thessaly Orvan read the headline at her desk, set down the report she had been holding, and said one word that her aide pretended not to hear. Then she called the information office and told them to prepare a public statement, because the choice was no longer between telling people and not telling people. The choice was now between the Empire's version and everyone else's version. She wrote the statement herself. It was careful. It was measured. It used phrases like unidentified vessel under observation and ongoing diplomatic contact attempts, and no immediate threat to civilian populations. It did not use phrases like our weapons had no effect, or we cannot translate their language, or we have been following it for 20 hours, and it has not acknowledged us once. She approved the statement and released it. The public reaction was immediate and not calm. In the city of Tethvara on Vorathi Prime, which was the largest city on the planet, and therefore the best possible place to observe a population receiving bad news all at once, the morning went sideways in approximately 40 minutes. Markets swung, not crashed, swung. Up, then down, then sideways, as traders tried to decide what an unidentified ship of unknown origin and unknown intent moving through imperial space meant for commodity prices. The answer, it turned out, was that nobody knew, and not knowing made the numbers do strange things. Schools opened, and then parents started pulling children out of schools, even though the ship was 38 hours away from the Velhari cluster and Tethvara was not in the Velhari cluster. The distance did not seem to matter. The pulling out of school's impulse was not a rational calculation. It was just what people did when the news was large and the information was small. The communication networks flooded. Not just personal calls, official channels, military inquiry lines, local government offices, the High Coordinator's public contact system. Every person who had a question they wanted answered by someone with authority was asking it simultaneously. The answers available were not good enough to satisfy anyone, because the honest answer to almost every question was we don't know yet, and that answer, delivered at scale, does not comfort. Council Member Teth, whose job it was to track the mood of the civilian population, sent Thessaly Orvin a report at noon that used the word unsettled 11 times. Thessaly Orvin read it and thought that unsettled was doing a great deal of work as a word. The news networks had found from somewhere. They always found things from somewhere, a partial image of the ship. It was not a clean image. The sensor interference had seen to that. It was blurred and dark and showed mostly a long shape against the stars. But it was enough. It was enough for the networks to put it on a screen and point at it and talk about it for 12 consecutive hours. The shape was unlike anything in the Imperial visual catalog. That was the fact the networks kept returning to. Every known species had a visual aesthetic, a design language that showed up in their architecture and their ships and their tools. You could look at a Dreth vessel and know it was Dreth. You could look at Sulari construction and see the Sulari in it. This ship looked like nothing. It looked like something that had grown rather than been built. It looked like a problem. The High Coordinator gave 2 public addresses before evening. Both were calm. Both were factual. Neither made the public particularly calmer or more satisfied with the facts. In the council chamber, the emergency session had never really ended. People had left and returned and left again. Food had been brought in and eaten standing up. The long table that was usually a place for careful deliberation had become something between a military command post and a room where frightened people tried very hard to look like they were not frightened. Admiral Kosvarin had not slept. He had considered it. He had gone to the small office adjoining the command center and sat in the chair there and closed his eyes. His brain had declined to cooperate. It kept running the numbers from Drain's sensor report. The weapon charge, the speed bursts, the way the interference swallowed sensor signals like a drain swallowed water. At 600, he stopped pretending to rest and went back to the command center. A message was waiting for him from Admiral Drain, time-stamped 4 hours ago. He opened it. Sir, at 1:30 station time, the object reduced speed by 30%. We are not sure why. The reduction was smooth and deliberate. It has maintained this reduced speed for the past 4 hours. No change in heading. No communication. I want to note that 30% reduction still puts it well beyond our best chase speed. We are following at maximum sustainable drive. If it decides to accelerate again, we will lose visual contact within minutes. Request guidance on whether to maintain pursuit if contact is lost or hold current position. Also, at 2:15, one of our science officers noticed that the object appears to be scanning. The sensor interference pattern changed. It's still blocking our readings of the hull, but the interference is now reaching out in pulses in all directions. It is looking at something. We don't know what. Drain. Cosvarin read the message twice. It was scanning. He had been in the fleet for 31 years. He had intercepted vessels. He had chased vessels. He had been chased. He knew what a ship looked like when it was running, when it was fighting, when it was waiting. He had never seen a ship in the middle of an intercept situation stop to scan its surroundings. That was not combat behavior. That was not even evasion behavior. That was curiosity. He sat with that word for a moment. It was a strange word to apply to something that had demonstrated enough firepower to make his best admiral stand down. But it was the right word. He sent a reply to Drain: maintain pursuit. Do not lose contact. Do not engage. The scanning behavior is important. I want records of everything it points those pulses at. Then he went to find Orath, because Orath's interpretation the day before, that is a communication, was turning out to be right. And Cosvarin was starting to think that the old intelligence chief was going to be more useful in this situation than anyone with a gun. He found Orath in a side room off the main chamber with 4 junior analysts and a screen full of signal data. The translation teams had been working on the 11-second communication burst for 20 hours. They had made progress in the way that a person digging a tunnel with a spoon makes progress technically forward, but not fast enough to matter yet. Anything, Cosvarin said. Orath looked up. It is definitely language, he said. The structure confirms it. It has grammar. It has what appear to be proper nouns, repeated sound clusters that function as names or identifiers. The phoneme set is unlike anything in our banks. He paused. But I have a theory. Tell me. The signal it sent, the 11-second burst, I think it was not a statement. Orath turned back to his screen. I think it was a question. Cosvarin waited. The intonation pattern at the end of the burst, the signal rises before it terminates. In every language in our bank, regardless of origin, a rising terminal pattern indicates interrogative function, a question. The structure at the end of this signal does the same thing. Orath looked at him steadily. It asked us something. We don't know what, but it asked. The room was very quiet. And we didn't answer, Cosvarin said. We answered with cannon fire, Orath said, not accusing, just statting, which may explain why it has not spoken again. Cosvarin pressed both hands against the wall and looked at the ceiling. He was doing arithmetic that he did not like, warning shots after an unanswered question. From the ship's perspective, whatever was inside it, the sequence of events was: enter space, ask a question, receive weapons fire. That was not a sequence that encouraged further conversation. If it asked a question, he said, what are the chances it's still waiting for an answer? Orath considered this with the deliberate care of someone who knew the question mattered. If whatever is inside that ship is patient, he said, possibly good. The fact that it slowed down is interesting. The fact that it is scanning rather than accelerating toward its destination is interesting. It is not acting like something that has given up on us. It is acting like something that is still watching. Then we need to answer it. We need to figure out what it asked first. How long? Orath looked at his analysts. The analysts looked at each other. One of them, a very young female who had been going through the signal data with red eyes and a posture that suggested she had been sitting in that chair since the previous day, said, at current progress, 40 hours. Maybe 35 if we get a structural breakthrough. We have 39 hours before it reaches the Velhari cluster, Cosvarin said. Nobody said anything. Work faster, he said, and went to brief the High Coordinator. On the bridge of the Sovereign's Edge, Admiral Drain was doing something he had not expected to spend an intercept mission doing. He was watching. The dark ship moved ahead of Third Fleet at its reduced speed, and every sensor that wasn't blocked by interference was pointed at it, recording everything it did. The scanning pulses that his science officer had noticed were now clearly visible on the equipment, regular rhythmic bursts going out from the vessel in expanding rings, reading everything in the area. They passed through Third Fleet ships without apparent effect. They were not weapons. They were just eyes. Big, thorough, unhurried eyes. "What is it looking at?" Drain asked Commander Haleth for the third time that morning. "Everything," Haleth said, for the third time. "It's doing a full survey of the area. Stars, gravitational fields, radiation backgrounds, mineral content of the asteroid belt we passed an hour ago. It's building a picture of this region. A detailed one." "It's mapping us," said Rathsal from navigation. "It's mapping the region," Haleth corrected. "Same thing, we're in the region." Drain looked at the dark shape on the visual screen. Mapping, scanning, moving at 30% below its previous speed. Not attacking, not fleeing, not answering, just looking at everything. His science officer had made a note in the mission log, and Drain had read it and not been sure what to do with it, so he had read it several more times. The note said, "The scanning methodology used by the unknown vessel is systematic and thorough in a way that suggests scientific intent. The pulses are not random. They follow a logical survey pattern. This vessel appears to be doing what we would call exploration." Exploration. Drain looked at the weapons readings that had nearly redlined every sensor in his fleet the day before. He looked at the hull that had eaten 12 cannon blasts like they were nothing. He looked at the long, dark shape moving steadily through Imperial space. He thought about those two things at the same time and found that they created a picture he could not quite hold steady in his mind. Because you did not build something that capable, something that protected, that armed, that fast, if you were just going somewhere to look around. You built something like that if you expected, somewhere along the way, to need it. Which meant whatever was inside that ship had traveled a very long way and built a very powerful ship to do it. Which meant, and this was the part Drain kept circling back to, they had not used any of it. Not on the border sensors. Not on the 47 warships that had tried to block their path. Not when the cannon blasts had hit them. They had the capability. They had chosen not to use it. That was a choice. He was still thinking about what kind of mind made that choice when Seti's voice cut across his thoughts. "Admiral, I'm reading a distress beacon." Drain turned. "From one of ours." "No, sir." Seti's hands were moving across his board. "It's a civilian transponder, short-range freighter, Imperial Registry. The signal is coming from," he looked up. "It's coming from inside the asteroid belt we just passed. Vessel appears to have sustained drive failure. They've been broadcasting for," he checked. "Sir, they've been broadcasting for 16 hours. 16 hours. Before the fleet had even reached this sector. A freighter sitting in an asteroid belt with dead drives, broadcasting a signal that nobody had been close enough to receive until Third Fleet came chasing a dark ship through the area." Drain started to give the order to dispatch a rescue craft. He didn't get the words out. "Admiral," Haleth's voice was different. "The unknown vessel, it's changing course." The long dark shape on the screen was turning. Slowly, smoothly, the way it did everything. Peeling away from its heading toward the Velhari cluster, pointing itself back the way it had come, back toward the asteroid belt, back toward the distress beacon. The bridge was absolutely silent. "It heard the beacon," Rathsal said softly. "It picked up the distress beacon." The dark ship, the ship that had flown through cannon fire and charged weapons powerful enough to read on sensors 40,000 kilometers away, was heading toward a stranded freighter at a pace that could only be described as gentle. Drain stood on his bridge and watched it go. He stood there for a long time. Then he said very quietly to no one in particular, "What are you?" The dark ship did not answer. But it had already answered something. The freighter was called the Merchant's Hope. It was a small ship by any standard. A boxy, practical vessel built for moving cargo between the outer systems of the Velhari cluster, not for speed or beauty or anything else that wasn't loading capacity. Its crew was four: a captain named Das Fel, his wife who served as navigator, a young engineer on his first posting, and an old cargo handler who had been on short-haul freighters his entire working life, and had survived everything the outer systems had ever thrown at him, including 2 pirate encounters, 1 collision with a rogue satellite, and a drive fire that still gave him bad dreams. None of that had prepared him for what was happening right now. The drive failure had been ordinary enough. A coupling seal in the secondary motivator had cracked, cheap parts, always cheap parts on short-haul work, and they had drifted into the asteroid belt while Dasfel's wife ran the numbers on whether they had enough thruster power to push clear before their orbit decayed into something uncomfortable. The answer had been no. They had been sitting in the asteroid belt for 16 hours, broadcasting their distress signal and watching rocks drift past the viewports and waiting. Now they were watching something else. The dark shape filled their forward viewport. It had come out of nowhere, or rather it had come from the direction of the Imperial fleet that was apparently out there somewhere, which raised questions the Merchant's Hope's crew did not have the context to answer. It was larger than anything Dasfell had ever seen up close. Its hull was dark and smooth, and seemed to absorb the light from the nearby star. It had moved into position alongside the freighter with a precision that made his best docking maneuvers look like accidents. Then it had done nothing for 2 minutes. Just sat there. Dasfell's wife gripped his arm. The young engineer had stopped saying anything approximately 90 seconds ago. The old cargo handler was standing very still in the doorway of the bridge, looking at the viewport with an expression that had gone past fear into something calmer and stranger on the other side of fear. "It's hailing us," said Dasfell's wife. Her voice was steady because she was a navigator and navigators were trained to be steady, but her hand on his arm was not steady at all. Different frequency from the Imperial bands. Something new. "Put it through," Dasfell said. What came through the speakers was not the alien signal the Empire's translation teams had been pulling apart for 20 hours. What came through the speakers was a voice. A clear, even, unhurried voice speaking in a language that resolved in Dasfell's translation implant, the cheap civilian model that handled the 12 most common trade languages, with a small delay and some roughness at the edges, but resolved. It said, "Merchant vessel, we read your distress signal. We are here to assist. Please confirm your status and your crew count." Dasfell stared at the speaker. His wife stared at him. The old cargo handler said from the doorway very quietly, "Well, answer them then." Dasfell answered them. Admiral Drain watched the entire exchange on his sensor display from 40,000 kilometers away, which was as close as he had brought the fleet because he did not know what the dark ship was doing, and he did not want to be in the way if it decided to do something large. What it was doing, apparently, was talking to the freighter. Not in the unknown signal it had sent once before, in a trade language, in a recognizable, translatable, currently spoken trade language, specifically Varick Standard, which was the most common trade tongue in the outer Velhari systems, and would have been broadcast on the freighter's own emergency channel as its primary language setting. It had read the freighter's language broadcast. It had switched languages. "It adapted," said Haleth, standing next to Drain with an expression that had been shifting for the last hour between professional analysis and something that was not professional at all. "It received the emergency channel's language flag and adapted its communication to match." "In how long?" Drain said. "Between reading the beacon and hailing the freighter," Haleth checked. "Approximately 4 minutes." Drain looked at the screen. It learned enough of the language to hold a conversation in 4 minutes. Enough for basic operational communication, yes. The translation is rough, but functional. Drain did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Patch me into the conversation, live feed." Said he patched it through. The bridge of the Sovereign's Edge listened to a calm, even voice in slightly rough Varick Standard asking the freighter's engineer to describe the nature of the drive failure in technical terms. The engineer described it. The voice asked 2 follow-up questions about the specific coupling model and the freighter's power reserves. The engineer answered both. The voice said, "Understood. Stand by." Stand by, Drain repeated. For what? Rathsal said. The sensor display gave them the answer. A section of the dark ship's hull opened, not like a weapons port, not like a launch bay, but like a door. A slow, deliberate, wide door. And from it extended something that resolved on the enhanced cameras as a docking arm. Long, careful, moving at a pace that would not frighten a crewed vessel sitting in an asteroid field. It was going to tow the freighter out. Drain sat down in his command chair. He sat down because his legs made the decision again, as they had done 2 days ago in the monitoring station, and he was beginning to think his legs were processing information faster than his brain. Get me high command, he said. Direct line right now. Cosvarin received Drain's transmission in the command center at the same moment that Oreth burst through the door of the main chamber with a data tablet in his hand, and an expression on his face that Cosvarin had never seen before. Oreth had been in intelligence for 40 years. Cosvarin had seen him receive news about wars, assassinations, ecological disasters, and the death of the Emperor's eldest son. He had never seen the old intelligence chief look like this. Like a person who had just understood something, and the understanding had rearranged him. We have a translation, Oreth said. The 11-second signal, we have it. The room went quiet. The signal it sent when it first approached the fleet, Oreth said, looking at the tablet, then at Cosvarin, then at Thessaly Orvin, who had crossed the room in seconds. The one we answered with warning shots. We know what it said. He read it. The council chamber was very still. Thessaly Orvin read the translation herself. Twice. She set the tablet down on the nearest surface and did not pick it up again. That is what it said, she repeated. Yes, Oreth said. That is all it said. That is the complete message, yes. She turned to the wall screen, where the tracking display still showed the dark ship's position near the asteroid belt, the docking arm extended toward a tiny freighter. She looked at it for a long time. The message the ship had sent, the question that had come before the warning shots, before 2 days of imperial panic and fleet deployment and emergency council sessions, and public broadcasts and unanswered hails, was 11 seconds long, and it said, We appear to have crossed into your territory by mistake. We did not mean to cause alarm. Can you tell us where we are? They were lost. That was the fact that the council chamber sat with for the next 20 minutes, while nobody could quite bring themselves to speak at normal volume. The ship that had shut down every sensor array on the border. The ship that had flown through 12 cannon blasts. The ship that had charged a weapon powerful enough to spike Third Fleet's sensor grid into the red. The ship that had sent the entire Galactic Empire into an emergency that had been running for 48 hours, and had nearly caused a public panic across 17 star systems. It had taken a wrong turn. How, said Council Member Drea, and did not finish the sentence. That is the question, Oreth said. He was calmer now. The expression was still there, the rearranged expression, but he had placed calm over the top of it with the ease of long practice. But I think the more immediate question is what we do next, because that ship is currently towing a stranded freighter out of an asteroid belt, and when it's done, it is going to want to talk to someone who can answer its question. Thessaly Orvin was already moving toward the communication station, at the far end of the room. Get me Admiral Drain, she said. On the bridge of the Sovereign's Edge, things had changed. Not in the tactical situation. The dark ship was still out there, still doing things with its sensor arrays that Third Fleet could not match, still capable of feats of speed and endurance that Drain's best ships could not approach. None of that had changed. What had changed was the way his bridge crew was breathing. They had been breathing like people waiting for something terrible for 48 hours. That particular tight, controlled breath that people use when they are trying to take up less space in the universe. Now they were breathing differently. Drain could not have described the difference exactly, but it was there, and it mattered. The docking arm had guided the freighter clear of the asteroid belt in 23 minutes. Clean work, smooth and careful, the kind of work that took skill and patience, and an interest in not damaging the vessel being helped. The dark ship had released the freighter into a stable position in open space and retracted its arm and then waited. "It's hailing us," he said. "Not just the freighter, the fleet." Drain straightened in his chair, put it through. The voice was different from the one that had spoken to the freighter. Still even, still unhurried, still in Varric standard with the same slight roughness. But different. A different person. "Imperial fleet vessels," the voice said. "We've been trying to reach you for 2 days and we're aware that most of those attempts didn't work very well. We apologize for crossing your border without permission. We genuinely did not know it was your border. Our charts for this region are incomplete. We would like to talk. We would like to do that somewhere that isn't a standoff, if that's possible. We have some questions and we're guessing you do too." Drain looked at his crew. His crew looked at him. "This is Admiral Drain of the Imperial Third Fleet," he said carefully. "Identify yourself, your species, your origin, your vessel's designation and purpose." A pause, short, not uncomfortable. "My name is Captain Yara Chen," the voice said. "I'm human. Our vessel is the Endurance Exploration class out of the Sol system, which I'm realizing means nothing to you right now, and that's part of the problem we need to talk about." Another short pause. "We're explorers. We've been out for about 3 years. We're a long way from home, and honestly, we got a bit turned around in the last sector. Your space is, well, it's bigger than we thought." Drain stared at the speaker. "Human," he said. "Yes. We have no record of any species by that name." "That's going to be a theme of this conversation," the voice, Captain Chen said, and there was something in the tone that Drain's translator could not quite identify. Not aggression, not apology, something that sat between them and tipped slightly toward amusement. "We don't have much record of you either. Like I said, charts are incomplete." "You crossed our border," Drain said. "Our sensors, our warning signals, "I know, I'm sorry about that. We picked up signals, but we couldn't translate them fast enough to understand what they were telling us. And then when ships came at us, a pause. We took a defensive posture. That was probably alarming. We didn't fire. I want to be clear about that. We did not fire. You charged your weapon directly at my flagship." "We showed you we had won," Chen said. The tone was calm, not apologetic exactly, direct. "Because you fired at us first. We needed you to know that firing at us again wasn't going to end the way you were hopping. I don't think that was unfair." Drain opened his mouth. He closed it. He thought about that sequence of events from the other side, crossing into unknown space, unknown ships appearing and forming a wall, warning shots. A weapon charge held and then released. "We needed you to know that firing at us again wasn't going to end the way you were hopping." He thought about the distress beacon, the docking arm, 23 minutes of careful, skilled towing work in an asteroid field. He picked up the line to High Command that was still open on his secondary screen. "Sir," he said to Kasvarin, who was listening, "I think we need the High Coordinator on this channel." Kasvarin's voice came back immediately. "She's already here, Admiral." Thessaly Orvan's voice came on, calm, measured, the voice of a person who had been managing crises for a very long time and had just found one that was not, it turned out, as catastrophic as it had appeared. "Captain Chen," she said, "this is High Coordinator Thessaly Orvan of the Vorathi Imperial Council. I would like to propose that we meet, properly, in neutral space with small delegations without weapons systems active." The pause this time was longer. "That sounds good to us," Captain Chen said. "We've been trying to get someone to talk to us for 2 days. That would be a nice change, another beat. And thank you for getting your ships close enough that we could pick up the language broadcast. That helped. We were starting to run out of good ideas." Drain looked at his screen, at the dark shape holding steady in open space, at the freighter sitting safely in clear orbit beside it. The ship that had eaten the Empire's sensor signals and walked through cannon fire and charged weapons that no admiral wanted pointed at him. Lost. A long way from home. Out of good ideas. He thought about what kind of species built something like the Endurance, and then sent it 3 years into the dark on incomplete charts. He was fairly sure he was going to find out. They picked a stretch of empty space between the asteroid belt and the Helgen drift, far enough from the Velhari cluster that the civilian population would not be watching from their windows, close enough that Third Fleet could reach it in under an hour if something went wrong. Nothing was going to go wrong. Drain was almost sure of that now. He was not entirely sure, because 2.5 days ago he had been almost sure about a great many things that had since turned out to be wrong, and he had learned something about the value of almost in the last 48 hours. But the voice on the channel had been steady and clear, and had talked about getting turned around in the last sector the way a person talked about missing a turning on a road they hadn't driven before. Not like a conqueror, not like a weapon. Like someone who needed directions. The shuttle that left the Endurance was small, nothing like the ship it came from. It was angular and practical, built in lines that were different from Imperial design, blunter, somehow less elegant, like everything on it had been chosen for usefulness over appearance. It carried 3 people. Drain sent his own shuttle from the Sovereign's Edge. He went himself. He brought Haleth and Vane, the translation specialist, because she had spent 30 hours on the signal, and he thought she had earned the right to be in the room when the source of it showed up in person. The shuttles matched position in empty space. The airlocks connected. Drain stood on his side and waited. The door opened. Captain Yara Chen was not what the Empire had expected. This was a problem with expectations in general. They were built from available data, and the available data on humans had been, until approximately 14 hours ago, non-existent. So the expectation had been built from the ship, from the sensor readings and the speed numbers and the weapon charge and the interference field, from 2.5 days of something enormous and silent and powerful moving through Imperial space without asking permission. The expectation was something large, something armored, something that looked like what it was capable of. Yara Chen was of average height for her species, which turned out to be roughly equivalent to a young Vorathi female. She had dark skin and short hair and eyes that were a very dark brown and moved with a quick, taking everything in quality that reminded Drain, immediately and sharply, of Orath. The eyes of someone who collected information the way other people collected breath, continuously, automatically, without thinking about it. She wore a plain gray uniform with a small symbol on the chest that Vane later identified as the stylized image of a ship and a star. She had no visible weapons. She walked into the meeting space between the 2 airlocks and looked at Drain and his team with an expression that was open and direct, and carried in it, very clearly, the particular relief of someone who had been trying to have a conversation for 2.5 days, and had finally found someone willing to have it. Behind her came 2 others. One was very tall, a male with pale skin and red hair, carrying a data tablet and looking at everything in the room with the same systematic interest as Chen, slightly more open about it, his head actually turning to follow each new detail. The other was shorter, older, with gray at the edges of her dark hair and a calm that seemed less like composure and more like bedrock. She was introduced as Dr. Osai, the Endurance's chief science officer. The tall one was First Officer Rains. Drain introduced himself and his team. They sat down in the small space between the airlocks, on seats that had been brought from both ships and arranged quickly and practically around a shared surface. It was not a grand diplomatic chamber. It was a narrow corridor dressed up to be one. Nobody seemed to mind. Chen spoke first. Before anything else, she said, through Vane's live translation, Chen had asked immediately about the translation process and had adjusted her pace to accommodate it without being asked. I want to say again that we are sorry for crossing your border and not responding to your signals. We picked up broadcasts, but we couldn't identify the language fast enough, and by the time we were working on it, she spread her hands flat on the table. An open gesture. Drain noted it. Events moved quickly. You could have stopped, Drain said. We didn't know stopping was what was being asked, Chen said. Some of what came through before we had any translation sounded like positioning data, coordinates. We thought it was navigation traffic. A short pause. We know now it wasn't. We are sorry. You were not sorry enough to change your course. We weren't sure changing course was safe either, she said. In unknown space with a fleet of ships we couldn't identify following us, staying on a straight line felt more honest than maneuvering. Maneuvering can look like a lot of things. Drain thought about that. He could not argue with the logic of it, which was mildly irritating. "Tell me about your ship," he said. Chen told him. She told him clearly and without apparent concern for what the information would mean to the people hearing it, which was either confidence or openness, and Drain spent the first part of the explanation trying to decide which. The Endurance had been built 12 years ago in a construction yard orbiting the fourth planet of the Sol system. It was one of 7 vessels of its class. The class was called Pioneer. Each ship was built for long-range deep space exploration, journeys measured in years, into regions of space that humanity had not previously visited, for the purpose of mapping, cataloging, and making contact with whatever was out there. "You built 7 of them," Haleth said. He was holding his data tablet, but he had stopped writing on it. "Ships of this class." 7 in the Pioneer class, yes, said First Officer Rains, who had the easy manner of someone who spent a lot of time explaining things to people who had not expected the answer they were getting. "There are other classes, different sizes, different purposes. The Pioneer class is the exploration line." "How many ships does your species operate in total?" Chen and Rains exchanged a brief look, not secretive, more like the look of 2 people checking whether they were remembering the same number. "Registered deep space vessels as of when we left," Rains said. "A little over 4,000, that's not counting short-range and system traffic." The number sat in the room. Drain looked at it the way you looked at a large animal that had appeared in a small space, with the specific focus of someone trying to assess what it meant before deciding how to feel about it. 4,000, he said. "Give or take," said Chen. "And how many of those are armed to the level that the Endurance is armed?" Chen's expression shifted slightly, not defensively, more thoughtfully, like she was considering how to answer accurately. "Most of them carry some defensive capability," she said. "The level varies. The Pioneer class carries heavier systems because they go further into unknown space, and they go in alone. We don't travel in fleets." "You travel alone?" "Yes. Into unknown space. That's the job." Drain looked at her, at the Shipan star symbol on her chest, at the dark eyes that were watching him with the same steady quality they had carried since she walked through the airlock. He thought about the Endurance, about the size of it, the speed of it, the weapon that had been held pointed at his flagship for 6 deliberate seconds. Built for one ship to go alone into unknown space. "Why?" he said. Chen looked back at him steadily. "Because it's there," she said. The translation came through clean. Vane did not stumble on it. It was a simple sentence. It gave Drain no new data about drive technology or hull composition or weapons capability. It told him nothing about the Sol system's location or humanity's political structure or their military capability beyond the Endurance. It was the most informative thing anyone had said in the meeting. He sat with it. Dr. Osei spoke for the first time. She had been quiet throughout, listening with the bedrock calm, making occasional small notes on her tablet. When she spoke, it was in the measured pace of someone who had thought carefully about what she was going to say before she said it. "I want to ask about your species' history," she said. "Your expansion history. How long have you been a spacefaring civilization?" Orath, who had insisted on joining via audio link from Vorathi Prime and was listening to every word, later said that this question was the point at which he understood everything, not because of what Chen answered, because of how long it took her to answer. Chen looked at Drain, then at Drain's crew. Something moved across her face that was quick and private and was gone before it could be read clearly. "We've had spaceflight for about 100 years, she said. The room did something. Not a sound, not a movement. A change in the quality of the air, the way the air changes in a room when everyone in it has the same thought at the same time and nobody says it. Haleth said it. 100 years, he said. Approximately, Chen said. Our civilization has been spacefaring for 3,000 years, Haleth said. not accusing, like a man reading a number off a board and not being able to make it fit against the number next to it. We have been building ships for 3,000 years. I know, Chen said quietly, we can see that. And in 100 years your species built. He stopped. He was looking at his tablet, which had the sensor readouts from the last 2.5 days on it, and he stopped. We worked fast, Rain said. There was that quality in his voice again, not boasting, not apologizing, just stating. Drain looked at Chen. How many inhabited worlds does your species have? One, she said. Well, a short pause. One home world, several colonies. The colonies are young. One world, Drain said. One world, she confirmed. So far. So far. Drain heard those two words with a clarity that had nothing to do with Vane's translation. They were simple words, present-tense words, words that described a current condition and implied, without drama, that the current condition was expected to change. One world so far. 7 Pioneer-class vessels, going alone into unknown space because it was there. 100 years from the ground to this. He thought about what the Empire looked like from out there, from the Sol system, wherever that was, from the outside. He thought about the 47 ships of Third Fleet and the 3,000 years of Vorathi spaceflight and the great weight and age of the Imperial civilization. He thought about how large it must seem, how established, how permanent. And then he thought about what was sitting across the table from him, 100 years old, one world, building ships like the Endurance because unknown space needed to be mapped and there was no good reason not to go. He thought about the distress beacon, the 4 minutes to learn enough of a language to ask useful questions, the docking arm and the 23 minutes of careful work in an asteroid field for the benefit of 4 strangers on a small freighter the Endurance would never see again. He thought about the weapon, held at peak charge, not fired. He thought about the question that had started all of this. Can you tell us where we are? He thought about what a species looked like when it was 100 years old and already doing this. And then he tried to think about what it would look like in 500 years, in 1,000, in 3,000, the age the Vorathi Empire had reached, moving at the pace the Vorathi had moved. He could not hold the shape of it. It was too large to hold. Captain Chen, he said, I have a question. Please, she said. The Endurance, your weapons, your drives, your hull, these were built to go into unknown space alone. He chose the next words carefully. Who were you expecting to find? Chen was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thinking about the honest answer. We didn't know, she said. That's the point. We didn't know what was out here, so we built for what we couldn't predict. She met his eyes. We thought it was better to be prepared for something we didn't find than unprepared for something we did. Drain nodded slowly. He thought the Vorathi Empire had expanded for 3,000 years. They had found other species along the way, some peaceful, some not. They had fought wars and signed treaties and built the largest political structure in this region of the galaxy. They had seen a great many things. He was fairly certain they had not seen this before. The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, the Endurance had been given a formal temporary passage through Imperial space and a navigational package that covered the region for 100 light-years in every direction, charts that would have taken humanity decades to build through their own exploration, handed over in an afternoon. In return, Chen gave Drain a data package of everything the Endurance had mapped in the 3 years since it left Sol. Systems, anomalies, spatial features that Imperial charts had wrong or had not reached yet. It was a fair trade, Drain thought. It was also a trade that told him something. The Empire had given humanity a map of 100 light-years. Humanity had given the Empire 3 years of solo exploration work covering a region the Empire's own scouts had not fully charted. 1 ship, 3 years, 1 crew. He stood in the airlock as Chen and her team prepared to return to their shuttle. Around them, through the small viewport, the Endurance floated in the dark, enormous, patient, its hull dark against the stars. Where will you go from here? Drain said. Chen looked at the viewport, at her ship. Home, I think, she said. We've been out a long time and we have a lot to report. A small pause. Then probably back out. There's a lot of space. Yes, Drain said, there is. She looked at him then, direct, clear, the quick dark eyes. We'll file proper entry requests next time, she said, now that we know you're here. That would be appreciated. She almost smiled, not quite. For what it's worth, your space is beautiful, the Helgen drift, the light off those gas clouds back by the border. She shook her head slightly. We took a lot of images. The people back home are going to love it. She offered her hand, a human gesture Vane had briefed him on during the meeting. He took it. Her grip was firm and brief. Then she went back to her ship. Drain stood at the viewport of the Sovereign's edge and watched the Endurance go. It did not leave at the burst speed it had demonstrated on arrival. It moved out at a reasonable pace, the kind of pace that said we are not in a hurry, we are not threatening, we are simply leaving now. It passed through the edge of the system and its drive engaged and it reached cruise speed in seconds, and then it was a point of light, and then it was not even that. Gone. He opened the channel to High Command. Thessaly Orvin was waiting. She had listened to the entire 4-hour meeting. He did not need to brief her, but there was a thing that happened after difficult situations, after the facts had been exchanged and the decisions made, where the person in the field and the person in the chamber needed to simply acknowledge to each other that they were on the same side of something. Well, she said. Well, he said. A moment of quiet. One world, she said, 100 years. Yes. And they just, she stopped, started again. They built that ship and sent it out alone because the space was there. That is what she said. Another silence. Admiral, Thessaly Orvin said, in your professional assessment, is humanity a threat to the Empire? Drain looked at the place where the Endurance had been. He thought about the right answer. He thought about the accurate answer. He thought about whether those were the same answer. Not today, he said carefully. They are one world with young colonies and 100 years of spaceflight. Today they are not a threat. He paused. But I think the more important question, the one the Council should probably be discussing right now, is what we do about the fact that they exist at all. What do you mean? I mean, Drain said slowly, that we have been the largest thing in this region of the galaxy for 3,000 years. We have known what everything around us is. We have had time to prepare for every possible challenge because we could see them coming from a long way away. He watched the stars. Whatever is coming from the direction of the Sol system, we did not see it coming. We could not have. It built itself in 100 years while we were looking elsewhere. And in that 100 years it built 7 ships like the one that just left. He paused. 7 that we know of. The channel was quiet. The question is not whether humanity is a threat today, he said. The question is what they will be when they are 3,000 years old, and whether we want to be the civilization that was their neighbor when they were young. He thought about Chen's face, the quick eyes, the open hands on the table, the voice that said we are sorry for the trouble and meant it, and also said we needed you to know that firing at us again wasn't going to end the way you were hopping and meant that too. I know what I think the answer should be, he said. So do I, said Thessaly Orvin. Outside, the stars were still. The Helgen drift caught the light of the nearby sun and scattered it in slow, soft colors across open space, beautiful, the way Chen had said, the way a person said a true thing simply because it was true. Somewhere in the dark, moving fast, the Endurance was already heading home. It would be back. Everyone in the room had known that, without saying it, from the moment Yara Chen walked through the airlock. It would be back. And next time, there would be more of them.